Fluency data is only helpful if it helps us make better instructional decisions. And we can only make better instructional decisions if we understand what fluency measures are actually measuring. In this video, I'm going to explain how fluency is assessed, what oral reading fluency, or ORF, actually measures, and how we use the results to figure out what instruction students need next. If you're new here, my name is Anna Geiger. I'm the author of Reach All Readers and creator of the Reach All Readers course and podcast. My mission is to help you understand and apply the science of reading. So let's start with the definition. What is fluency? Fluency has three components: accuracy, so reading the words correctly; rate, reading at an appropriate rate, so think about a speaking pace; and finally, prosody, which is reading with expression. Fluency has often been called the bridge to comprehension. And that idea has its roots in LeBerg and Samuel's automaticity theory, which explains that our mental resources are limited. If students are expending a lot of mental energy just to read the words, comprehension is going to suffer. When word reading becomes accurate and automatic, students have the mental space left to focus on meaning. If we want to help our students become fluent readers, the first step is collecting data to help us make informed instructional decisions. One of the most common ways to measure fluency is through using the ORF, the Oral Reading Fluency Assessment. The ORF is part of a category of measurements called CBM, or Curriculum-Based Measurement. If the term CBM is new to you, it can sound like a mouthful. It confused me for a long time. I didn't understand where the term came from or what it meant, so let me briefly explain. CBM began several decades ago with Dr. Stan Dino. He worked with other researchers to develop short, standardized assessments that measured how accurately and efficiently students performed different academic tasks. There are CBM measures for math, spelling, writing, and reading, which we're focusing on today. Because these tasks were examples of things students were already doing during the school day as part of the curriculum, things like reading text, doing math, or spelling words, this type of assessment became known as curriculum-based measurement, and that's where CBM comes from. For our purposes today, we're going to talk specifically about the CBM measure called ORF, which stands for Oral Reading Fluency. If your school uses a universal screener like Acadians, Dibbles, AimsWeb, FastBridge, ORF is included. Now, even though ORF stands for Oral Reading Fluency, a better name might be Oral Passage Reading, or even oral reading automaticity, because it's not measuring all aspects of fluency. Remember, fluency has three components: accuracy, rate, and prosody. ORF is a measure of the first two, accuracy and rate. So for accuracy, we want to see the percent of words correct, and for rate, we want to see WCPM, words correct per minute. When you give an ORF assessment, it's given one-on-one. Because the assessment is standardized, the instructions should be read exactly as provided. The student reads an unpracticed passage, so this is a cold read, for 60 seconds, and typically it's 3 different passages, and then you take the median score. So for example, if they read one passage at 75 words correct per minute, and one at 83 correct, and one at 94, you would take that middle score as the one that you're going to record. And you'll do the same thing for the accuracy rate. I should also note that the way you score the errors is also standardized. So if you're using Acadians, for example, you want to go through their manual and follow their procedure for counting errors and self-corrections. To calculate the score, you take the total number of words read minus errors to get WCPM, words correct per minute. You'll also want to figure out how many words in that section were read correctly to get an accuracy rate. We usually begin administering ORF in the middle of first grade. So let's talk a little bit about the passages themselves. ORF passages are not written specifically to be decodable. This can be a little bit confusing for first grade teachers who are using a phonics scope and sequence, and then they see words on the assessment that include phonics patterns they haven't taught yet. And they wonder, why can't I use a passage, a decodable passage, that's written to show what phonics patterns have actually been taught and if my student has mastered them? To answer that question, we need to understand the purpose of the ORF assessment. It is not a phonics assessment. It's actually a screener. The purpose of ORF is to determine whether or not students are on track to be okay readers. So those tests are specifically designed and tested to make that prediction. So for example, if a student is reading a passage at the end of first grade, that specific passage has been tested with other first graders, end of the year first graders, and tracked to see, hey, if they perform at a certain score on this particular passage, then they're predicted to be an okay reader. But if they score below this benchmark, then they're not. It's not about assessing phonics skills. It's about making a prediction. It's about assessing for risk. These passages have been carefully developed and tested, and performance on them predicts with a high degree of accuracy whether students are on track to be okay readers. As a reminder, ORF measures a combination of accuracy and rate. And those two measures help us know which students may need additional support for progressing on their reading journey. It's helpful to think about ORF as a thermometer, so it tells us if something is wrong, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what. That's where diagnostic assessments come in, and we may need to dig a little deeper. So if a student scores below benchmark for accuracy, their accuracy rate is low, then we know they have a problem with word reading. So it makes sense then to give a phonics diagnostic assessment so we know what gaps to fill. On the other hand, if a student's accuracy rate is fine, but their words correct per minute is low, so they're accurate but slow, then it would make sense to do a fluency intervention where we practice reading text. Once we choose an intervention based on our results, we want to use progress monitoring to make sure our intervention is working. And that's why companies like Acadience have extra sets of ORF passages for different periods of the year that you can use to progress monitor. It only takes about a minute a week. You only have to do one for progress monitoring, not 3. And you want to chart that on a graph to see if the student's rate or accuracy is improving. Now, when you're doing the screening, so for example, a child is in the middle of 3rd grade, you want to use the ORF passage that is for the middle of 3rd grade, even if they're reading below that. You want to use that to be able to make the prediction. However, when you're doing your progress monitoring, you want to use a passage that is at about the level the instruction is being given. For example, if you have a 3rd grader, but their phonics knowledge is very low, you might want to progress monitor using the 1st grade passage so that you can actually see improvement from week to week. And the point of that, again, is to know if your instruction is working. If you do 5 checks and you find out, oh, this progress line isn't really moving, then I need to do something different. Maybe that's intensify the instruction, change it up a bit, try something new, but we need to be very aware of what's happening as it's happening. And so that's why it's really useful to do those progress monitoring checks weekly so we can get enough data within about 5 weeks' time to know if we need to make a change to our instruction. I would love to talk to you more about how to assess and build fluency across the grades. And so you're invited to my workshop, The Fluency Formula. In that workshop, we look closely at what research tells us about how fluency develops, and I share practical strategies that you can start using the very next day. If you want to be more confident teaching fluency, not just assessing it, I'd love for you to join me. You can find the link below this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.